Hello and welcome to another SonicLAB. Today we're looking at the brand new synthesizer from Novation, which is the Novation Summit. This synth is a kind of moving on, or as a doubling up of the original Peak technology, which I reviewed in some depth, probably last year it was. And this synthesizer is another one of these kind of hybrid polysynths. This one is based on exactly the same technology. Essentially, you could think of it like two Peaks because it has double the polyphony, double the effects, but it's also got an additional keyboard, which is a 61 key keybed with aftertouch. This was apparently very much requested by users of the Summit, users of Peak rather. They wanted sort of more, and that's what they've got. At the heart of it are these three Oxford Oscillators. I think they used to be called New Oxford, but now they're just called Oxford. And these are the brainchild of Chris Huggett. And Chris Huggett, for those of you who don't know, is a very well-respected and long-serving synth designer. His previous synths go back to the Wasp and the Oscar, and he's a really smart guy. Lots of people swear by his ability to design great synthesizers. And so this is essentially the kind of core of his new thinking. Now these oscillators are programmed in FPGA, which is Field Programmable Gate Array, which is a kind of, it's like programmable analog chip. They're a little bit more expensive. Quite a lot of synths use this technology now, and it means that there's more ability to kind of change and tweak the internal structure and voicing. I don't profess to know an enormous amount about them, but if you want to check out the original Peak review, I went into this in great detail. In fact, this whole review is probably going to be more about the new capabilities of the synth rather than an entire rehash of all of that. So do check out the original Peak review for a fully in-depth. But essentially, as we say, this is like two Peaks. So we've got the same three oscillators, we've got the same filter, multi-mode filter, this is analog filter, and we've got the LFOs and distortion and triple effects, chorus, delay and reverb. There are differences, however. Obviously the first big difference is because this is a 16 voice synthesizer, it could be split into a layer A and B. And in many ways it's quite similar to the Rev 2 kind of style, where you've got layers A and B in split. The Summit can do a split and a layer and a dual. Dual means that we can play bi-timbrally effect, so we can access one of the parts from the keyboard and another one via external MIDI, or both via external MIDI if that's what we want. So I can set up these completely disparate splits and layers. So essentially I've got two complete synthesizers either side of the split, with up to 8 voices or more on each, up to 8 voices on each. I don't think you can steal between them, but when you've got one layer only, you're in just single mode, you can use up to 16 voices. So a big change, obviously now we've got the extra keyboard, means we've got room for a lot more buttons and knobs. And one of the things that makes a real difference is this sort of assign and animate control here, as well as the active voices. So if I play some notes, you can see how many voices I'm using on either layer. I've got the ability to control each layer individually. So on the A layer, the animate buttons and the hold, which will make them latch, and the pitch and the mod wheel change to blue. If I go to B, it changes to orange. So it's actually quite a clear delineation between the two things. I'm also able, and we've got separate animate for each layer. I can press both, and then the pitch and mod wheel will work for both, and then all of the front panel controls will be common, obviously relative to whatever patch is assigned either side of either the split or the layer or the dual. Right away, we've got a lot more power, and the original Peak sounded massive, and with those three identical oscillators we could create these enormous amounts of texture and modulation. But we've got some more additional features here, some of which have been brought in as hardware kind of from the get-go, sort of Peak firmware updates, and now become the main features of the Summit synth. Okay, so before we get on to the details, let's just take a look at the hardware. Wooden end cheek, I think it's wooden. We've got USB, this is MIDI only, MIDI in, out and through on full-size DINs, CV input, which is same as the Peak, so we can take a control voltage signal and modulate it in the mod matrix. Same with the pedals, 2 pedals. There's also a stereo input, which is pretty cool. Actually, these inputs, they've tweaked it so that you can get these, they could go directly into one of or both of the effects engines, which means you could use it as an effects processor if you wish. Stereo main outputs, There's also an auxiliary pair of outputs as well, so we can have layer A and layer B coming out on separate stereo pairs, headphones, and then all the way along we've got a little Kensington lock and full-size mains with a power supply. Okay, so there's another new feature in the Summit, and I think this is obviously something that's been done in firmware. I don't know if that'll be available in Peak as well. Now, if we look at the filter, we've got this dual mode, which is a dedicated mode. So we've got low pass, band pass, high pass, and dual mode. And the dual mode is the kind of filter that we might have seen in the Oscar. Oscar had the way of creating, because there are basically, this is 12 or 24 dB, and the dual mode creates two 12 dB filters that you can separate the peaks and create the resonance. And if we go to the close-up here, we can press the filter button. We can see we've got all these different modes of filters. We can go low pass to band pass, high pass to band pass, low pass plus, so these are parallels, and a low pass up to high pass to high pass. And what I've done here in the mod matrix is I've routed the mod wheel to filter separation. So in this, I take the, you can hear that there's a sort of dual resonance, which is separate left and right. So you can create, with dual filters, you can create these lovely sort of vowel-y sounds, and it's just another nice mode to be able to have, particularly in a polysynth. We can create some very rich textures just from sort of minimal amounts of notes. Another nice touch on the front panel, this has changed the actual hardware, is we've now got looping on the envelopes, a dedicated switch which gives you the ability to actually switch on the front panel. Take this patch here and just play. Get a bit of envelope depth. Now, switch loop on. Got some interesting effects that we can get there with audio rate type mod. Because I've got the release, that key release, that I can just delay on it. Put a bit of a glide on. This is just a single envelope again. So it all adds to the sort of ability to jump in and grab some of those controls, because the original Peak is great, but there were a couple of things that you thought, oh, it would be nice if they were a bit closer to the surface, and that was one of them, and that is actually nice to see. Additionally, we've got the ability to dial in FM from the front panel as well, because this was hidden in an oscillator. So if I just go to a, let's go to just an init patch, which I think we'll just go to, and I can just dial in manually. Try that a fifth up. Or I can have it come in on the LFO. And remember, like with the shape sources on the envelopes, these are multiple, so I can dial in some manual, none, and some LFOs. So there are 3 separate routings here, like there are with the shape mod. So you've got another sort of little mini 3 mod matrix. And this again means all that sort of FM goodness that we got in the original peak is now sort of further forward. So we can create some much nicer and more interesting yeah, I mean, this again, like the original peak, this has become a bit of a challenge to review because as soon as because you've got 16 notes of polyphony, having all that extra ability, you tend to kind of gravitate more towards these long, evolving polyphonic patches because you can just keep them stacking the notes up, certainly when you're in single mode. And so it's really good fun to play with, and those extra notes make all the difference. Another nice feature is the ability to add effects modulation. There are 4 mod slots, and in this patch what I'm doing is I'm modulating with LFO3 to the reverb level, which creates this sort of rather lovely kind of spatial pan. But it's really, if I take the effects off, it's just a sine wave, single oscillator sine wave with a tiny bit of mod. But if we come back over to here, we can also see another addition, and this is they're a global. We've got, as well as the initial LFOs, which have their various ranges, we've also got global LFOs, which are they're single, so we haven't got 1 per voice, they're just global. And there's 3 and 4, and we've got access to those on the front panel, and that means we got, again, easy tweaking. So this sound is just take it out of. But I've also got on this one right here in the mod effects, I've just got mod wheel to oscillator shape, just taking it just changing the tone, no filtering going on here or anything. And that ability to modulate the effects brings them into the sort of, you know, because a lot of synths have that ability. You know, we've got the Rev 2, you can modulate certain effects parameters. Also with the DeepMind, we can do that. In Summit, we can modulate distortion level, chorus rate, chorus depth, chorus feedback, delay, level, time, feedback, reverb level, reverb time, reverb low pass and high pass filters. So enough to get some extra movement. And like I say, this is a very simple patch. I go back to my reverb level. And it sounds lovely. So now let's talk about Unison. I've got a patch here which is just using the Arpeggiator with key latch mode. I've got a single oscillator. So now I'm in mono mode, I can go into poly mode. I can bring up 3 oscillators. I've got one on sine for a bit of weight and one on pulse width. So then, how far can we go? So we can go a lot further because there are a number of ways. We can go into mono mode, then we can go into the voice mode, and we can get into unison. So we can go up to watch the level here, up to 8, and then we can detune. But we can also spread them out in stereo, which is quite effective when called. But there's more. We can go into the oscillator. Let's have a look where it is. And we've got diverge and drift, so we can add even more. But you'll notice that we're still only getting 8 voices. So what that means is we can only stack 8 oscillators or 8 voices times 3 oscillators, 24, onto a single note like this. So to do that, we want to go into multi-mode and assign the same patch to both A and B. And then what we can do is hit the both control. So that means that now when we're playing a single note, we're triggering all of those oscillators. So that's what .48 oscillators Unison sounds like. So while we're on the subject of patches, we've got 4 banks of 128 single patches and also 4 banks of 128 multi-patches. So it's worth mentioning about the multi-patches because on some synths, not many I grant you these days, but they are purely just references for the singles. So if you edit the singles, the multis get screwed up. Not so in Summit. Summit is a completely dedicated memory space. You can load single patches in as starting points and then tweak them and then save them. And when you save a multi, it saves everything. So effectively you get 512 plus 512, and if you were, wanted to, I suppose you could use that. The multis as have 2 patches on each, so you could end up with what's that? Over 1,500 patch locations. Not that I'd imagine you need them. I also mentioned that the patch changing is very quick, like a lot of Novation gear. It's very snappy, so you might be able to do some clever stuff with that. Now, one thing I do want to bring up is the Arpeggiator. The Arpeggiator is common to both synth engines, i.e. you get 1 on each, but you also get dedicated controls. You get the tempo, the rhythm, the gate, an octave and random and chord. In this multi, I've got something set up here, which is just, it's basically a layer. So if I press a note, I've got 2 sounds, tinkly sound and a kind of bassy sound. So what I've done here is, if we go to the Arpeggiator settings, on the top sound, the tinkly sound, I'm clocking it at 4 quarter note divisions and 16 note divisions on the bass note. So if I go back to my multi, I might take the level of that down a bit, sound a bit hot. So what I can do is I go into both, I'm going to switch key latch on, and then I'm just going to start playing some sounds and see what happens. I'm getting some really nice sort of cross rhythms because I'm using different rhythms as well. It's not just a straight 4s, I'm clocking the 4s, so I can then play something, well, let's... Bring up another oscillator. It's just lovely. I mean, that's the thing about this synth. It's got so many sort of sound possibilities, and the integrated effects, the effects do sound lovely. So because the effects are so nice, I mean, certainly it sort of borders on the ambient side. I mean, we can obviously clock I should mention the arpeggiators externally, internally, and add different swing amounts and all of that kind of stuff. But the effects really add a lot, and that's the sort of the peak sound, but times 2. And the other thing that's very cool about the effects is we can send an external signal, stereo signal, into one of the effects engines, sort of bypassing the entire synth. So we don't have to have VCA and all of that stuff going on. It will just come straight in and straight out, and then we could route that back out of another pair of outputs. So we could effectively use this as an effects generator as well if we weren't using all of the effects in the patches. So there's quite a lot of flexibility. And the thing about this synth is it really does... It's one of those hard to review synths because it sounds great. It's got all of that good stuff going on. And let's not forget, I mean, I haven't gone into a massive amount of depth on this because I encourage you to watch the peak review. But there are 16 mod slots which are have via, so we can go via mod wheel via something else to a destination, and the positive and negatives amounts, and there's also the effects mod slots as well. So there's a ton of routing and potential, plus all of that distortion. We've got distortion into the filter, and then an overdrive distortion at the effects level, which adds just ton. You can get really gnarly and lots and lots of great sound. I have to say, you know, yes, it's an expensive item, but it's sort of two peaks. I mean, it's a couple of grand, I think. I think the exact price will scroll below. So, you know, it's like a kind of power synth. But in my experience and my opinion of it, it is a really nice instrument. And if you're going for that kind of complex polysynth sort of voicing and sounds, then this is a really good place to start. Obviously, I didn't mention the keybed. Keybed feels pretty nice. It's got a kind of firm-ish synth action, and obviously you've got aftertouch, though it's not poly aftertouch. I can't really think of that many things that I would like to change about this. I mean, it is what it is, and it sounds a certain way, and it's got a vibe to it. And I think the addition of some of these additional these front panel controls mean the sound design aspect is really sort of brought even more to the fore. I suppose that would be my only maybe criticism, is there's still a lot of stuff that goes under the hood that you have to get access via the individual element menus, which might put some people off. But with something this complex, I don't see how else you could do it. Anyway, that's it for watching. I think what I'll do is I'll plug in an external thing and process it via the synths on the player. See you next time. Okay, so I've plugged in the neutron into the external input, which is going into effects level. It's on a drone. I've just got 2 oscillators, just for 2 notes. I've got a bit of reverb, a bit of delay, and some chorus. And then on my A layer, I've got this line which is going into the A reverb. So and I've got the reverb level on the mod wheel. And then on the B level, or the B part, I've got this lovely no effects on it.